The howling wind rattled the windows of Sarah Owens' small cabin as she clutched her crying baby to her chest, trying to soothe him with whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. 3 days had passed since they'd eaten anything more substantial than the last scraps of cornmeal mixed with water, and even that had run out this morning. 6 months a widow, and tonight, hunger was a physical pain that twisted her insides and made her head swim with dizziness. In the Dakota Territory of 1878, winter showed no mercy to those unprepared for its wrath. Sarah's husband Thomas had died suddenly from pneumonia in the fall, leaving her alone with 3-month-old Joseph on their homestead, 10 miles from the nearest town. She tried to be strong to manage on her own, but the winter had come early and fierce, trapping her with dwindling supplies and no way to reach help. "Hush now, Joey," she murmured, rocking him gently. "Mama's here, we'll be all right." But the words rang hollow in the cold cabin. The fire was dying, with just enough wood left for the night if she was careful. Tomorrow, she'd have to venture out to the woodpile, though she barely had the strength to stand. Baby Joseph's cries grew louder, his little face red with hunger and distress. Sarah unbuttoned her dress to nurse him again, though her milk was becoming scarce without proper nourishment for herself. She hummed softly, fighting back tears as her son latched on, desperate for what little sustenance she could provide. "I'm sorry, my sweet boy," she whispered, touching his soft cheek. "I'm so sorry." The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the wind's howl, making Sarah freeze. Visitors were rare even in good weather, and in a blizzard nearly unheard of. Fear crawled up her spine. Bandits and outlaws sometimes roamed these parts, preying on isolated homesteads. She quickly buttoned her dress and laid Joseph in the wooden cradle Thomas had crafted before his death. The baby immediately began crying again, but Sarah moved to the small window, peering out into the swirling snow. A lone rider approached, a large man on a sturdy horse, his face obscured by a scarf and hat pulled low against the weather. Sarah's heart hammered. She glanced at Thomas' rifle hanging above the fireplace. She'd fired it before, but never at a person. Would she have the courage if needed? The stranger dismounted, leading his horse to the side of the cabin where a small lean-to offered minimal shelter. He carried a bulky saddlebag and approached the door with purposeful strides. 3 solid knocks echoed through the cabin. Sarah took a deep breath, grabbed the rifle, and held it ready but not aimed directly at the door. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Name's Flynn Bartlett, madam. I'm the new ranch foreman at the Rocking Bee, about 15 miles east. Got caught in this blizzard heading back from Willow Creek." Sarah hesitated. The Rocking Bee was a large cattle operation owned by the Blanchard family. She'd heard they'd hired a new foreman after old Charlie passed, but she'd been too consumed with survival to pay much attention to local news. "What do you want?" she asked. "Just shelter till this storm passes, madam. Got provisions to share. Heard a baby crying and figured you might need supplies." The mention of provisions made Sarah's empty stomach clench painfully. Still, caution won out. "Show yourself at the window first," she demanded. A moment later, a face appeared at the window, a man around 30 with kind blue eyes and a strong jaw dusted with stubble. He pulled down his scarf to reveal his full face, and Sarah saw nothing threatening in his expression, only concern and the weariness of a difficult journey. Lowering the rifle slightly, Sarah moved to unlock the door. The moment it opened, a gust of freezing wind and snow burst in, making her shiver in her thin dress. The man quickly stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots before closing the door behind him. "Thank you, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark blonde hair. His eyes immediately went to the crying baby, then back to Sarah's pale face. "Looks like I arrived at a good time." Flynn Bartlett was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in practical winter gear that had served him well against the elements. Without waiting for invitation, he began unpacking his saddlebag on her small table. "I've got jerky, dried apples, coffee, a loaf of fresh bread from town, and some cheese," he said, laying out the items, "and a small jar of honey. Town baker's wife insisted I take it when she heard I was heading out in this weather." Sarah stared at the food, suddenly feeling light-headed. She leaned against the wall, the rifle forgotten at her side. "Are you all right, madam?" Flynn asked, stepping toward her with concern. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice was faint. We haven't, it's been a few days since." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're hungry, both of you." Sarah nodded, unable to maintain her pride in the face of such desperate need. She moved to pick up Joseph, who continued to cry. "Please sit," Flynn said, pulling out a chair at the table. "I'll cut some bread and cheese." Sarah sank into the chair, cradling Joseph against her shoulder, patting his back as he fussed. Flynn worked quickly, slicing the bread and cheese with a pocket knife, then adding a thin layer of honey to the bread before presenting it to her. "Eat slowly," he advised. "Your stomach will need time to adjust if you haven't eaten in days." Sarah took a small bite of the bread and honey, closing her eyes as the sweetness filled her mouth. It took all her willpower not to devour it in seconds. Flynn, meanwhile, had moved to the stove, adding wood from a pile near the fireplace and stoking the dying embers. "I've got coffee beans." "A hot drink will help," he said, finding her coffee pot and filling it with water from the bucket by the door. As the cabin slowly warmed and Sarah ate small, careful bites, Joseph's cries began to quiet. Flynn worked efficiently, moving around the kitchen as if he belonged there, brewing coffee and heating some water to mix with a small amount of dried milk he produced from his bag. "For the little one," he explained. "Not as good as mother's milk, but it might help if you're struggling." Sarah should have been embarrassed by his understanding of her situation, but hunger and gratitude overrode any sense of impropriety. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Flynn nodded, his expression serious. "No one should be out here alone with a child in winter. Your husband died of pneumonia last fall," Sarah replied, the familiar ache of loss rising in her chest despite the more immediate relief of hunger being addressed. "Thomas built this place, had such dreams for our future here. Then one day he was coughing, and a week later he was gone." Flynn poured coffee into 2 cups and sat across from her. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Owens, Sarah Owens, and this is Joseph. How old is he?" 9 months now." Sarah accepted the cup of coffee, warming her hands around it. "We were managing until the blizzard started early this year. I couldn't get to town for supplies." Flynn's eyes scanned the nearly empty cabin. "You've been rationing what little you had." Sarah nodded, trying the warmed milk mixture. Finding it acceptable, she offered some to Joseph in a small cup. The baby drank eagerly. "Tomorrow I'll bring in more firewood for you," Flynn said. "And I noticed your roof has a weak spot on the north corner. I can patch that too if you'll allow it." Sarah studied him carefully. Kindness from strangers was rare in these parts, especially with no expectation of return. "Why would you do that for us?" Flynn sipped his coffee, considering his words. "My mother was widowed young with me and my sister to raise. Neighbors helped us survive. I promised her I'd never pass by someone in need." He paused. "Besides, no decent man could ride away knowing a woman and baby might not make it through winter." As night fell fully, the storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, warmth slowly returned. Flynn insisted Sarah take more food while he prepared a small pallet for himself near the door. "I'll sleep here tonight if that's acceptable. Head out when the storm breaks." Sarah nodded, exhaustion overtaking her now that her immediate hunger was satisfied. She retired to the small bedroom with Joseph, leaving Flynn by the stove. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without the gnawing fear that morning might not come for both of them. Dawn broke with blessed stillness. The storm had passed, leaving a brilliant white landscape outside the frosted windows. Sarah awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet mail humming. For a disorienting moment, she thought Thomas had returned, that his death had been just a terrible dream. Reality returned as she looked down at Joseph sleeping peacefully beside her. Not Thomas. The stranger Flynn Bartlett. She rose quietly, dressed, and entered the main room to find Flynn stoking the fire with wood he must have already brought in from outside. "Good morning," he said, standing as she entered. "Hope I didn't wake you. Thought I'd get a head start on chores." "You've done enough already," Sarah said, though the sight of a well-stocked woodpile visible through the window filled her with immense relief. "Barely started," Flynn replied. "Storm's passed, but there's 4 feet of snow out there. You're not getting to town anytime soon." The implications of his words settled heavily on Sarah. 4 feet of snow meant continued isolation, which meant, "I've made a decision," Flynn said, interrupting her thoughts. "I'm riding to the Rocking Bee to inform Mr. Blanchard I'll be taking a week's leave. Then I'm coming back here with enough supplies to see you through till the thaw." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Bartlett, I couldn't possibly accept—" "Flynn, please," he interrupted. "And you can and will accept. I won't leave a woman and child to starve when I have the means to prevent it." His tone brooked no argument, and Sarah found herself speechless in the face of such determined kindness. "Now," he continued more gently, "is there anything specific you need from town besides the basics, medicines, anything for the baby?" Sarah's pride warred with necessity. Finally, necessity won. Flour, sugar if possible, and diapers. "I've been washing and reusing the few we have, but they're wearing thin." Flynn nodded, making mental notes. "I'll be back by nightfall tomorrow. The trail to the ranch is well marked, even in snow, and from there to town is a clear road." He hesitated. "Will you be all right until then?" With the food he'd brought and the freshly stocked woodpile, Sarah knew they would manage far better than they had been. "Yes," she said. "And thank you." Flynn smiled then, a warm expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Sarah's heart skip unexpectedly. "No thanks needed, Mrs. Owens." "Sarah," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Flynn." His smile widened. "Sarah it is." As promised, Flynn returned the following evening with 2 pack horses laden with supplies. Sarah watched in amazement as he unloaded sacks of flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, preserved fruits, candles, lamp oil, diapers, warm blankets, and even a few small toys for Joseph. "The general store owner's wife added those," Flynn explained, seeing Sarah's surprise at the wooden rattle and carved horse. "Said every baby needs something to play with." Over the next week, Flynn proved himself to be as good at repairs as he was generous with provisions. He patched the roof, fixed a broken window shutter, repaired the leaning front porch steps, and reinforced the door that had warped with moisture. Each day, he rode out to check for stranded travelers or cattle from nearby ranches, returning by nightfall to share meals with Sarah and play with Joseph. The baby had taken an immediate liking to Flynn, cooing and reaching for him whenever he came near. For his part, Flynn displayed a natural way with the child, holding him confidently and speaking to him as if Joseph understood every word. "You're good with him," Sarah observed one evening as Flynn bounced Joseph on his knee, the baby giggling delightedly. "Had lots of practice with my sister's children," Flynn replied. 5 of them now back in Missouri." "Do you miss them?" Flynn nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Every day, but after my brother-in-law died in a mining accident, the farm couldn't support us all. I came west to earn enough to help them." "That's very noble of you," Sarah said softly. Flynn shook his head. "Just family. You do what you must for family." On the 6th day, as they sat at the table sharing a stew Sarah had prepared from the supplies he'd brought, Flynn grew uncharacteristically quiet. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, occasionally reaching into his pocket as if checking for something. "I return to work tomorrow," he finally said. "Mr. Blanchard has been generous with leave, but the ranch needs tending." Sarah felt a surprising pang of disappointment. She'd grown accustomed to Flynn's presence, his steady reliability and easy conversation filling the lonely silence that had been her constant companion since Thomas died. "Of course," she said, keeping her tone light. "You've done more than enough. We can manage now." Flynn looked up from his stew, his blue eyes serious. "That's what I wanted to discuss, the managing part." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, placing it on the table between them. Sarah gasped softly. It was a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," Flynn said, his voice low and earnest. "She gave it to me before she passed, said to save it for when I found someone worth building a life with." Sarah stared at the ring, her heart pounding. "Flynn, I don't understand. I'm not proposing love, Sarah, not yet. That would be presumptuous after knowing you such a short time." He took a deep breath. "I'm proposing partnership, a chance for both of us to help each other. You need someone to help work this land, protect you and Joseph. I need a purpose beyond just earning wages." He reached across the table, not touching her but extending his hand palm up in invitation. I'm a hard worker. Honest. I've saved most of my earnings these past 2 years. I'm good with livestock, can plant crops come spring. I'd treat Joseph as my own. Sarah looked from the ring to Flynn's earnest face. This is unexpected. I know, Flynn acknowledged. And if you need time to consider, I understand, but spring will come and this homestead needs working. You need protection. The nearest neighbor is miles away. And what would you get from this arrangement? Sarah asked, her practical nature asserting itself despite the emotions swirling within her. Flynn's expression softened. A home, a purpose beyond myself, a chance to help raise a fine boy, he paused, and maybe in time something more between us. If that's what we both want. Sarah's mind raced. She barely knew this man, yet in a week he had shown more kindness and character than many men revealed in years. Without him, she and Joseph faced an uncertain future at best, starvation at worst. I would need to know you better, she said carefully. Marriage is not something I take lightly. Nor do I, Flynn assured her. We could have a long engagement. I'll continue working at the Rocking Bee, visit when I can, help with the homestead. You'll have time to decide if I'm the man you could share a life with. The proposal was practical, thoughtful, and oddly touching in its lack of romantic pretense. Sarah found herself drawn to Flynn's honesty, his willingness to acknowledge that love might come later, after trust and partnership were established. May I think about it overnight? She asked. Flynn nodded, returning the ring to his pocket. Of course. That night, Sarah lay awake long after Joseph had fallen asleep. She thought of Thomas, of the love they had shared, the dreams they had built together. Would he want her to remain alone, struggling to maintain the homestead they had started? Or would he want her to find security for their son, even if it meant opening her heart to another man? By morning, her decision was made. When Flynn entered the kitchen, packed and ready to return to the Rocking Bee, Sarah was waiting. I've thought about your proposal, she said, Joseph balanced on her hip, and I have conditions. Flynn set down his hat, giving her his full attention. Name them. 6 months. We wait 6 months before any formal announcement. You visit when your work allows, help with the homestead as you offered. We learn about each other, see if this partnership could work. Flynn nodded slowly. And after 6 months, if we both agree, we marry in the spring. Sarah straightened her shoulders. But I won't enter a loveless marriage, Flynn. I had love once. I know its value. I believe affection can grow from respect and shared purpose, but I won't settle for less than the possibility of love. A slow smile spread across Flynn's face. That seems more than fair. He pulled the ring from his pocket again. May I? Sarah extended her hand, and Flynn slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly loose, but the weight of it felt significant, a promise of possible futures. I'll return on Saturday, Flynn said, picking up his hat. Bring more supplies, start clearing fields for spring planting. Sarah nodded, suddenly shy now that the agreement was made. Flynn stepped closer, hesitating before leaning in to place a gentle kiss on her cheek. Thank you for your trust, Sarah. I'll work every day to earn it. True to his word, Flynn returned every Saturday and Sunday for the next 6 months. He brought supplies each time: food, tools, seeds for planting, fabric for new clothes for Sarah and Joseph. On his visits, he worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, preparing fields, building a small barn, and even constructing a chicken coop complete with 6 hens acquired from a neighboring farm. Sarah watched him with Joseph, noted how the baby's face lit up whenever Flynn appeared, how naturally the big man had stepped into the role of father figure. She observed Flynn's patience when teaching her to shoot more accurately, his gentle encouragement when she struggled with a task, his thoughtful listening when she spoke of her fears and hopes. By the 3rd month, Sarah found herself watching for Flynn's arrival hours before he was due, her heart quickening at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. By the 4th month, their goodbyes included lingering embraces that neither seemed eager to end. By the 5th month, those embraces had turned to tentative kisses that left Sarah breathless and Flynn looking at her with an intensity that made her blush. On the 1st day of the 6th month, a letter arrived from Mr. Blanchard, offering Flynn a permanent position as ranch manager with a substantial raise and a small house on the property. Flynn brought the letter to Sarah that weekend, his expression troubled. "It's a good opportunity," Sarah said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. The Rocking Bee was 15 miles away, too far for daily commuting, which meant Flynn would need to live there. "It is," Flynn agreed, "but it's not what I want." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, heart pounding. Flynn took her hands in his. "This, you, Joseph, our home." He gestured to the homestead around them, now flourishing under his care. The vegetable garden was thriving, the newly planted fruit trees had taken root, and the small herd of cattle he'd helped her acquire grazed in the distance. "I've given notice at the Rocking Bee," Flynn continued. "Mr. Blanchard understands. He's even offered to buy our first harvest at fair market price." Sarah stared at him, processing his words. "You're choosing us over advancement. It's not even a choice, Sarah." Flynn's voice was gentle but firm. "The past 6 months have shown me everything I need to know. I want to build this life with you. I want to watch Joseph grow, teach him to ride and fish and be a good man. I want more children if you're willing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second ring, newer than the first, a simple band with a small pearl set in its center. "I've been saving for this since that first night," he said. "Will you marry me, Sarah?" "Not for convenience or security or practicality, but because I've fallen in love with you and can't imagine my life without you in it." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as the truth of her own heart became clear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling that first night, when you brought bread to a starving widow and her baby." Flynn slipped the pearl ring onto her finger alongside his mother's band. "I know we agreed on 6 months, but I'm hoping you'll consider moving that timeline forward." Sarah smiled through her tears. "How forward were you thinking?" "The circuit preacher comes through Willow Creek next weekend," Flynn suggested, a hopeful gleam in his eye. Sarah laughed, the sound bright with joy. "Next weekend it is." They were married in the small church in Willow Creek, with Joseph babbling happily in the arms of Mrs. Blanchard, who had taken a shine to the little boy. The entire Rocking Bee crew attended, along with townsfolk who had heard the story of the foreman who had found a widow and child starving in a blizzard and brought them not just bread, but a new beginning. As Flynn carried Sarah across the threshold of their home that evening, Joseph already asleep in his cradle, the homestead felt truly complete for the first time. The lonely, hungry days of winter seemed like a distant memory as spring blossomed around them and in their hearts. "I never thought I'd find love twice in one lifetime," Sarah said as they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Dakota plains in gold and crimson. Flynn's arm tightened around her waist. "Some people never find it once. We're doubly blessed." "It started with bread," Sarah mused, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And a ring," Flynn added, kissing the top of her head. "Though I think it really started with a baby's cry carrying on the wind." If Joseph hadn't been crying that night, I might have ridden past, never knowing what I was missing. 5 years later, the Bartlett homestead was unrecognizable from the struggling cabin Sarah had nearly starved in. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Joseph, now 6, had been joined by 3-year-old twins Elizabeth and Emma, and Sarah was expecting their 4th child in the fall. The vegetable garden had expanded into productive fields of wheat and corn. The original small herd of cattle had multiplied, supplemented by sheep and more chickens than Sarah could count. A proper barn stood where Flynn had first sheltered his horse, and a bunkhouse housed the 2 young men they employed to help with the increasingly successful farm. On the anniversary of Flynn's arrival, a date they celebrated every year, the family gathered on the front porch after dinner. Flynn produced a small loaf of bread from behind his back, along with a pot of honey. "For remembrance," he said, slicing the bread as he had that first night. Joseph, old enough now to understand the significance, watched with bright eyes. "Tell the story again, Papa, about how you saved Mama and me." Flynn shook his head, sharing a smile with Sarah. "That's not quite how it happened, son. I didn't save anyone. I just knocked on a door with bread and a ring." He looked at Sarah, his eyes full of the love that had only deepened with each passing year. "Your mama did the saving by being brave enough to let me in." Sarah reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We saved each other," she corrected softly. And that's the best kind of love story there is. As the children enjoyed their honey bread, Flynn pulled Sarah close, whispering in her ear, "I thank God every day for that blizzard." Sarah smiled, thinking of the desperate hunger that had preceded Flynn's arrival and the different kind of hunger for companionship, for partnership, for love that his presence had ultimately satisfied. "So do I," she whispered back. "So do I."